Earlier today, I had a chance to speak with Tory MP Joyce Smith, who spent her last 10 years in office fighting for the vulnerable women of the sex trade. Since Bill C-36 came into effect in December, we now take a look at what has changed on the Canadian landscape. I'm standing here with Joyce Smith, Member of Parliament for Kildon St. Paul. Ms. Smith, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Now, it's been almost a year since the Bedford decision that was passed last December that struck down 3 laws with respect to prostitution. Where are we now?
Right now we have Bill C-36 that just became an active law on December 6th of 2014, and so we have progressed in terms of putting forward a law that will go after the Johns and the pimps, and secondly will help the survivors, the victims of human trafficking. So we've come a long way.
We know that there are academics, there are lawyers that are petitioning some of our provincial premiers. Are you concerned that perhaps some of these groups have the sympathies of some of our provincial governments? Well, these are opponents of Bill C-36.
Yes, I know. I know that has happened, and I address each and every one of them as they could come up. The reason being is I have worked with victims for well over a decade, close to 16 years now, and I have to say that we are right. We know that in other countries that have targeted the pimps and johns and have supported the victims to get out of the sex trade and have supported them to have rehabilitation and re-education, their lives have absolutely changed. And we have survivors right now that are right in the forefront saying, this is what happened to me. It was Canada's ugly secret. There was the feeling that women like to be bought and sold. Women like to make money and then give it to their pimps, their johns, and their traffickers. Well, that's not true. Women like to have dignity and a future, and they like to be able to go forward. The story behind what they call prostitution or human trafficking is coming out. It's an ugly, mean story, and this story is changing now. Now we have some of the organizations for the sex workers saying, I know I saw a news article the other day that said, you know, business is down. And I mean, the law only came into play December 6th of 2014, just a few weeks ago. So it's working already.
That's interesting you suggest business is down. We've reached out to the Toronto Police Services, and they are refusing to comment in any way, shape, or form about how they'll be enforcing this new law. I'm not suggesting that anything nefarious is going on. Perhaps it's perfectly innocuous. But my question is, are you concerned that perhaps under this new law, enforcement may be inconsistent?
Well, with any new law that comes in, enforcement is always inconsistent because they don't have the education. There are police forces all across this country and police officers right here in Toronto that are working very, very hard to enforce the law. And often police forces don't come out and talk about everything that they're doing. But what is really happening is they're getting an education on how to recognize human trafficking. Because in this country, everybody used to think that prostitution was the country's oldest profession. Well, it's not. It's the country's oldest oppression, and they're learning that. The judges are learning that. The juries are learning that. And the communities are learning that these are not horrible, bad people that they see on the streets. Mind you, it's not on the streets now, it's mostly in the hotels. But I have to tell you, often these young people at an underage level were lured by a boyfriend or reasonable facsimile that said, we're going to give you the world. And then they start to lure them and force them into the sex trade. And then once that happens, they lose everything. They lose their dignity, they lose their self-worth. And you know, there's survivors that are coming out right now and talking an awful lot about that. And we're going to hear more of that as the months unfold this year.
We've pulled some numbers from Stats Canada, looking at numbers in Ontario in particular. The number of charges and prosecutions in Ontario with respect to prostitution has gone down. From 2005, it's dramatically decreased from over 1,200 charges down to under 250 in 2013. Now, of course, in 2014, a new variable was introduced, and that is Bill C-36. But does this suggest perhaps a concerning trend on the part of police officers with respect to wanting to prosecute those involved in prostitution?
The prosecution has a lot to do with the judge and the jury. And often police officers can bring a victim in, and the victim is not helped because the perpetrator gets off. What has increased is the convictions on human trafficking, because our country is in a transition right now. They used to look at prostitution one way, as something the women wanted, and it was hard to get convictions, whatever convictions they got. It wasn't taken as seriously as right now. They're talking about something else. They're talking about human trafficking where victims are being bought and sold, and that statistic has gone up. From in 2004, when I went to Parliament, there was one human trafficking charge in the country. That was a Manning McPanning. Now we have, I know the RCMP just came out with 264 plus convictions, and that's just the RCMP. That's not the other police forces. And I know Toronto Police did a great job when it did the Operation Northern Spotlight. It was part of that, and there were convictions on human trafficking under that. So police officers are being trained, and the training is extremely important, as well as the judges, the public, the crowns, and the prosecutors.
All right. Well, I have to ask you, in the last 30 seconds that we have left, you've decided to leave federal politics after 10 years. What will you be doing?
I will be continuing to work with the vulnerable, and I want to have the operational side come to fruition in Canada. I'll be working very hard to stop human trafficking in this country.
Well, good luck with your future, Ms. Smith. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks.